Good evening, members, guests, teachers, and students. My name is Sandia Bayou. I'm the Director of Development at the World Affairs Council of Greater Houston. It's our hope that you and your families are doing well and staying healthy. Again, we're so glad that you are joining us today. And now more than ever, it's important to stay informed about what is happening, not only in our city, but around the world. The World Affairs Council of Greater Houston gives you that opportunity to be engaged and brings you speakers, just as tonight's speaker as well. And I want to invite all of you to subscribe to our YouTube channel so you can watch this recording and many other opportunities that we have posted for you to enjoy. While I have you also, if you allow me to share some of the upcoming programming notices. Tomorrow, July 30th at 5 p.m., same place, same time, the complexity of the USA-China relations with David Firestein, the inaugural president and CEO of George H.W. Bush Foundation for US-China Relations. That is tomorrow, July 30th at 5 o'clock. Next Wednesday, August 5th, again, 5 o'clock, you guessed it, staying with Asia, Hong Kong's global importance with Eleanor Albert. Eleanor is the writer at the Council on Foreign Relations. You can find, again, these two and so many other upcoming programming notes on our website, wachouston.org. Lastly, to present a question for today's event, please use the Q&A tab at the bottom of our Zoom screen, and we'll make sure that we get to your question and pose it to our guest. And now, on to the programming. Inspiring the next generation of foreign service in an anti-globalistic world. Joel Hellman is the Dean of Edmund Walsh School of Foreign Service. Prior to joining Georgetown in July of 2015, Dean served as the World Bank's first chief institutional economist. He has also previously taught at Columbia University and Harvard. Dean, welcome.
Thanks, Sandia, and thank you to everyone from the World Affairs Council for inviting me here. And let me thank my dear friend, Kit Ashby, for arranging this. I know he's a prominent member of the council and a graduate of our school, and great to be here with you.
Absolutely. Second on that as well. For today's dialogue especially, I think it's important to understand the historical background of our school as we transition from the history kind of on today and definitely look into the future. So if you allow me a couple points from the history. Walsh School of Foreign Service was founded in 1919 as the response to the involvement of the United States in the First World War. And from there on, to prepare the US to engage in a global stage. Edmund Walsh's vision of school that would prepare students for all major forms of foreign representation, whether commercial, financial, consular, or diplomatic. The school's name, the Foreign Service, actually preceded the formal establishment of the modern United States Department of Foreign Service 6 years later in 1924. Dean, the US Foreign Service did not exist before World War I, and the size of the US Army, as we had mentioned, on the global scale was somewhat smaller to what it became and how the World War I really transformed the US. Some of your comments as we referenced that point early in our discussion last week of how the World War I impacted decision of creation of your school.
Thanks, Sonia, and I'm happy to talk about it because, I mean, it's not only historically significant because I think it has tremendous resonance for the current moment that we're in. And thanks very much for reminding everyone that the U.S. Foreign Service stole our name. We haven't claimed it back and we haven't asked for royalties, but we were indeed the first school of foreign service, the first school expressly focused on international affairs in the United States. And the notion of service actually was drawn not from the creation of an institution like the Foreign Service, but linked very much to our Jesuit identity of service to the world and a recognition that this is not just about studying and analyzing the world, but indeed service to the world. But you're absolutely right to point out the fact that our school was created at a moment of global crisis, a crisis that the world had never experienced to that point. More people died in World War I than collectively died in all wars prior to it. Destruction had reached an enormous number of countries. Everyone was impacted. And as you were pointing out, America prior to World War I was largely an isolationist power. It was a country recovering, indeed, in not less than a generation from its own civil war, from its own westward expansion. It was a country that had not been truly integrated in global trade. It was the world's largest debtor nation prior to the war. After the war, it becomes the world's largest creditor nation because it becomes an important financial power supporting the global war effort. It becomes a major military power, and in fact, the dominant military power of the day after it had been a minor military power. And of course, through Woodrow Wilson and the work in Versailles and engagement around the world, it became a major diplomatic power. So the world was changing rapidly, and the founders of the school, indeed, mostly business people who were thinking about how America's transition to a global player, a global economic player and a security player, were thinking we need to train a generation of students who will fuel America's new role in the world. And I think that was the kind of the moment at which the school was founded. Now, 100 years later, it's fascinating to find ourselves, after all of what we've achieved in terms of multilateralism, in terms of global engagement, in terms of service, we're in a moment where isolationism again is impacting not only America's view of the world, but so many countries are turning inwards in a way that they haven't in perhaps a generation. And of course, we find ourselves in the moment of a truly global crisis in which there's not a single human around the world whose lives has not been impacted. So, we find in tremendous echoes from the history of our founding.
Absolutely. And as going back to your school's alumni, we know that so many of the alumni have become leaders in the public, private sectors, and really continue to embody the dedication to service, as you mentioned, in the various fields. There are so many outstanding individuals, and just to recognize a few, we do know that President Clinton is a graduate of your school, King Felipe of Spain, Japanese foreign minister. I think over 75 US ambassadors have graduated, and so many other capable, fantastic diplomats were born out of your training. So really salute to that. And as you mentioned, our Christopher Ashby, our ambassador, again, my salute to him. He is our ambassador in residence, so very grateful for his special introduction. And yes, again, they continue to embody this education all over the world and kind of to the global view that it's not just the US diplomats, but it's also you train, diplomats from abroad, and they go back home and make it a better place really to be. And here we are in 2020, right? 100 years after establishing of the school, as you said, facing another completely, truly global crisis. In a few weeks' time, Georgetown would be getting ready to welcome students back to campus. Your answer to this question would have been so different 48 hours ago. What is really the latest of plans to reopening this fall?
Well, yes, it's actually been an important day for Georgetown. Today, this very day, we announced a reversal of our previous plan to try to bring back as many students as we could. We were hoping to bring back about 2,000 students, a little less than half of our undergraduate student body back to campus. With appropriate social distancing and arrangements to maintain the public health environment. And we were going to invite back all of our graduate students. We have over, in the School of Foreign Service, 1,000 graduate students. We were inviting them back to campus. They don't live on campus, but they would engage on campus. And we were hoping as best we can in these really difficult times, recognizing that we don't have a solution anytime soon of a vaccine. We're trying to create a model in which we can continue the educational engagement on campus and in a remarkably different environment. It would be an environment that was unrecognizable to any of us who spent time on college campuses. It would be people wearing masks, sitting 6 feet apart, faculty behind plexiglass and so forth. But we were ready to do what was needed to keep going the engagement that we think is so critical. But as you know, and I think you're facing in Texas and the greater Houston area, the increasing spread of the virus around so many other parts of the country, a change in the District of Columbia, which is now quarantining and forcing quarantine on students arriving from almost 30 states around the country. And unfortunately, a serious delay now in the ability to get test results that were critical to creating a health environment that we could trust. We are now facing 10 to 14 days delays in our area in getting the results of tests, meant that we just could not confidently bring students back to campus, knowing that they would have to be quarantined for 2 weeks in true isolation, that we wouldn't be able to test them in any reasonable fashion to find out about their own health guidelines, and therefore maintain a safe campus. So we've announced that we're going fully online for our undergraduate students, and at least at the start for our graduate students. We're trying to maintain the ability to ensure that our international students can come back, and I think we should talk a little bit more about the role of international students. But it's a heartbreaking day for us because, as many of you know, parents will know, getting ready for your student for 2 or 3 weeks time to start a new life and then have those hopes dashed it's just heartbreaking.
And as I mentioned earlier, I cannot imagine Georgetown as a part of DC without students. It's just having a hard time envisioning that.
But as you know, and I think many universities will actually be moving in a similar, if they haven't already, and our colleagues in George Washington University and others are starting to make decisions. It's just not viable to bring students from all around the world and all around the country when we don't have a regime of testing, contract tracing, and the ability to handle what will ultimately be outbreaks of the virus on campus. But the question is, how well do you handle it when it happens?
I completely agree. Thank you for sharing that. And you mentioned, that was actually one kind of next talking point, is the chat about foreign students. Like I said, you've created so many thought leaders, global leaders, and in general, even before the crisis, where do your international students come from? And it's a big part of network that Georgetown offers. And let's talk a little bit about these international students, and of course, what happens, with them.
Well, I mean, look, if I go back 100 years ago to our founding, if our mission was to open up America to the world, part of that was, of course, to open up the minds of our students through the academics and the classes and the learning that they do on campus. But a critical part of that, and this is from the day we opened, was to ensure that the student body reflected the tremendous diversity. And I think for generations of students who come to our school, whatever they get from their professors and their classes, what they'll often remember is the tremendous diversity of experiences, the people that they were able to engage with, build friendships, understanding. And so international students, as I've said, it's the lifeblood of our school. It's like air or water. If you're trying to think about the way the world works, and for us, what's absolutely critical, and where we started 100 years ago, is we take an approach to the world that's about building empathy and understanding for the way different cultures perceive global problems. So we've always emphasized a multidisciplinary education, history, politics, economics, but rooted also in language, because if you understand language, if you understand and have to be forced out of your own comfort zone by putting yourself in another culture, in another language, then you're more likely to recognize that your own view of the world is not necessarily the way everyone thinks about the world. So part of that is the international students are so critical to having that. And of course, we've always had a huge share of our students coming from every country in the world, and then going back out to play major roles. And what pains me about the moment is, part of it is COVID has obviously created obstacles for students to come. And those obstacles are everyone's facing. But what even deepens that pain is that I'm afraid that our government is actually placing more restrictions on students' ability to enter the country. And that is adding another layer of difficulty for international students and making it feel that we are pulling out the welcome mat for international students. And to me, that so deeply harms America's interests. Because as you mentioned, and this is where I'll finish, you know, I spent most of my career at the World Bank, and I worked in over 80 different countries in the world. And I know many of your members traveled, engaged, worked around the world. And everyone will recognize that the moment you meet someone in another country, in a business, in the government position, in an NGO, wherever it might be, who's had experience in the US educational system, who's got a degree, who did even a course of study, a short course of study, their whole perspective changes.
Absolutely.
And that means that you have a very, very different set of counterparts. So, I mean, many people have talked about how much we lose in the United States, just in terms of money and fees and investments in this country from this remarkable there's 1 million international students who study in the United States. And they bring in over $30 billion of investment ultimately in our country. But beyond that, I think more importantly of the role that those students can go out to play in the world as in helping to build alliances with the United States and help to work together. And I think that's what I'm so concerned about we're losing at the moment.
Yes, and very much I think ties into that is the belief perhaps, and I think you have a better statistic actually to shows it's not the case, which is that the students want to come, take, and leave, that there's just really kind of draining our institutions in a way. And you had mentioned earlier that is quite not what you're finding.
Yeah, I mean, look, this is one of the things that I know, I'm sure many of your members are worried about, is in this environment with COVID, with the changing dynamics politically and globally, are people running away from multilateralism and a commitment to diplomacy? And a few things that I find very optimistic. First of all, in our school, despite all these problems, we've never had higher rates of applications. And we've never had a higher yield on the students who want to come. So the students want to come. They're not being put off. The second, and you alluded to this point, there are people who think that foreign students come, they take the information, they take the skills, and then they go off and invest those skills elsewhere to our detriment. And in some cases, actually, you know, we've heard about the true and genuine problem of espionage and other things in which students may be part of an effort to, you know, extract not only knowledge, but, you know, extract experience secrets even, whether they're industrial, whether they're beyond. But the truth is, first of all, that most of the students who come want to stay and continue to invest those skills in our own country. So let me give you one example. Artificial intelligence, which is one of the most important investments that we're making. You'll all know and heard a lot about Chinese students and China engaging in artificial intelligence and taking our information. We, in one of our institutes, did a study of Chinese students who come to engage with us on artificial intelligence. First of all, 45% of the graduate students who work in artificial intelligence are from China. So we're getting a tremendous amount of engagement. Mm-hmm. But more importantly, 90% of those students intend to stay in the United States. So these are students that are bringing their expertise, they're learning, and they want to stay and get jobs and engage in the United States. And from what we hear from their employers, they're not taking away jobs from others. They're adding to the overall pool of knowledge and the strength of the workforce in AI.
I'll tell you, I'm one of those students who came from as an international student, so I wasn't there, you know. I don't know where that would have been, and definitely you and I would not be having this conversation. So very much salute to that. We've spoken about the school, we've spoken about the students. Let's focus on the actual studying, and what happens now, really, what happens now, as in the new model of delivering education that, again, what was current yesterday, it looks like it's changed today, and it certainly sounds that web participation is the only way for schools and organizations for us to really to proceed with. Um,
Well, I do think that, look, there are, in this environment where many countries around the world, not just in the United States, we see it across Europe, we see it in Asia, we see it in South Asia, we see it elsewhere. Many countries are turning inward, and there is a questioning, a debating of what were seen as kind of standard truths of the multilateral system. And I think we have a responsibility as a school, not just to say, oh, we have this strange interregnum in this global history, where everyone's turning inward, and hopefully it will be a short one and we'll just get back to where we were before.
yeah.
The truth is, wherever we were before brought us to the moment in which there was such a deep questioning in the United States and around the world. So we have to ask ourselves, why has there been a reaction to globalization? Why has there been a distrust of multilateralism? Who has been left behind from what we thought were kind of standard truths about the way of global trade and the way we engage? And why has there been this backlash? So to me, it's very, very important as we bring our students together to say in our educational program, you have to ask critically why we have been brought to this point and what changes, what challenges to our standard understanding of multilateralism, of global trade, of cross-cultural engagement, what we need to question and build new understandings that will hopefully address some of the things that brought us to this deep kind of questioning and criticism of multilateralism. There's also another thing that I think we need to do, which is that I think the skill set of the next generation of foreign service, those who engage in foreign service, and by that I mean not just our diplomats, but our business people, are those who go into multilateral organizations, those who go into global NGOs. They need a set of skills that are very, very different than what people needed 100 years ago. Take the pandemic. In order to really understand the global pandemic, we need students who understand the science of global health, but at the same time, we need to combine that with a true understanding of diplomacy and cross-cultural understanding. And unfortunately now, in our own country, we do pretty well in each track, but often not very well in integrating those tracks. So if you look at our school, we are focusing our future on the interaction across boundaries that have traditionally been separate. One of the most important is the difference, the link between science and technology and international affairs. And our fastest growing major in the school is people who combine science, technology with an understanding of global diplomacy and global interactions. A second area across boundaries is business and global affairs. Not because we know all business people have to be global now, we understand that. But actually, if you're thinking about any problem that we need to solve, it needs to have a private sector component and a public sector component. And why do we keep training students? If they go to business school, they do the private sector. If they go to an international affairs school, they do the public sector. We need to get students to understand markets as well as states. We need to get students who understand diplomacy as well as investment and engagement. We need to understand the firm, because firms are as important these days. As we sit around listening today to Amazon, Google, Facebook, and others, testifying before Congress, these firms are critical global players and almost as important, if not more important, than states. So we need to get our students to change their mindset so they think about the world and the environment as one that has a different set of players and a different skill set. So I think we're trying to change the way we educate students. So the new generation of globalists will have a very different skill set than the last generation of globalists, while still building on what we were, our emphasis over the last 100 years.
Absolutely. And it's actually, you answered one of my questions already had. So it's, thanks for that, because it's great to see that we feel that we need to address that. A little bit on the World Affairs Council side, we have in our education outreach, we have Student World Affairs Councils, which we call them SWACs. And that I have to say we are over 40 such councils actually are already established in Greater Houston area. We are extremely proud of it. Again, high school students, university students, and they come from so very different backgrounds. They come from these are Title I schools, they are homeschools, private schools, state-run schools. So it's a really wonderful way for us to continue delivering that message. And in preparation for this conversation with you, I have reached out to some of the students and, asked them to submit some questions in advance. So I have those incorporated as well. And still continue on a side note, one of our actually students that was part of the Student World Affairs Councils of Houston student and attendees, Sofia Doroshenko, she actually was accepted in your school, and she was one of those students that was so looking forward to finishing packing her luggage and had already her ticket in a pocket ready to go. So all to say that we do train some of those that eventually, join your institution and, go on onto helping us with the global skills and diplomacy and all the great things. So the question is, for individuals that are getting ready to apply, is there something in this new era that would be helpful for them to plan in advance and have skill? As you just said, that 100 years ago, that was so different than what is kind of the expectation for the new applicant to have, or perhaps start thinking 2-3 years out before they join Georgetown.
Well, we are a unique school in the sense that everyone wants to go to a good university, and they want to go to the best university they can, and they want the whole experience. We are a school that was built around a mission, that we discussed in our history, a mission of service and a mission of engagement with the world. So as a result, the students who come to us are students with a much more focused mindset, if you will. They're not out there necessarily playing the field and maybe I'll major in poetry, maybe I'll major in physics, maybe I'll learn, which is a great thing, don't get me wrong. I don't think every 16-year-old should know exactly what their future is going to be. But we tend to get students who, for whatever reason, maybe it's their own experience, maybe it's their own passion, maybe it's what they've seen traveling, maybe it's their family background, who really want to delve deeply into some aspect of international engagement. And they want to be in a community of others who are equally committed to that. And so I think that's what we're always looking for. We're looking for those students who know where they want to be. And look, you mentioned before that we have an extraordinary list of alums. We have presidents, kings, prime ministers, foreign ministers. We have the largest number of ambassadors. More ambassadors have graduated from the School of Foreign Service than any other school in the nation. We're still the largest feeder school into the U.S. Foreign Service. We've got alums that have an extraordinary record of success. And I think part of that is because they're so driven. They've known often from an early age. They have the passion to be part of the world. They have the passion to engage the world. Some of them because of their travels, some of them like a young boy from Hope, Arkansas, who I don't think had ever been out of Hope, Arkansas before he applied to the School of Foreign Service, but dreamed of engaging the world and said, this is the place where I'm going to do it. So we're always looking for students who have that drive, have that energy, and have that commitment to serve the world.
Wonderful, thank you. Another question comes from another student. In the last few years, have you heard from students who are concerned that U.S. is withdrawing from its leadership role in the world? And if so, how do you reassure them that the U.S.'s role is still vital and their area of study is still crucial?
Well, as I said, I mean, partly maybe in response to, I think, what is a global, and I think it's important that, obviously here in the United States, we focus on the domestic issues. And certainly there has been, in this administration, a very different view of America's role in the world. And it's been very explicit. The Trump administration has been very explicit about that. The implications of that view have been America has ceded very much a leadership role in bringing other countries together. It still plays a critically important role. But in terms of leading multilateral engagements, bringing other nations along in multilateral coalitions to deal with global problems like climate change, like cybersecurity, like global pandemics, the U.S. has expressed very little interest in this administration of doing it. And the result is that US influence, at least in designing multilateral coalitions, US is still an important and influential player, has, I think, waned. Now, what does that mean? Does that mean that students are saying, well, why should we invest in this kind of education if the US is changing its role? And not only the US, but it's happening in England, it's happening it's happening in China, it's happening in India. Should I invest in this? And in fact, as I said, we're seeing the opposite response. We are seeing students saying it's precisely because we recognize how important these roles are that we are even more committed to engaging at a place like the School of Foreign Service. And incidentally, I've seen this across the board in international affairs schools. So if I talk to my colleagues as deans, including in Texas and around the country, and we're all seeing cresting peaks of interest from students. And I think that's a wonderful, optimistic moment for me, because it just says that the students are reacting. The students want to see a different role for the United States to play. And I do want to emphasize finally that I don't think it's a status quo ante. I don't think it's a roll the clock back. And let's forget about the last 4 years and remember what it was in the glory days of American multilateralism. There were deep problems that led to this questioning. And if we don't get to the bottom of those problems, if these students who come to us don't sort of ask tough questions about the core global beliefs that we've had prior to this last 4 years of questioning and debate, I think we are doing a disservice, because there's no going back to the status quo ante. We have to think of a new way of American engagement with the world that is, I think, dealing with a lot of the problems that we did not deal with sufficiently over the last 20 years or so.
Yeah, thank you. I'm reading some questions coming in from our viewers. Brenda asks us, what do we expect is the next step for the US-China relations and will impact US citizens overall?
Oh, this is, it's a great question. And it's a deeply disturbing one because obviously our relationship with China will be a critical bellwether for where the world global order is going. I mean, China's role in the world, increasing strength and power as an economy, increasing influence through its economic ties, increasing influence through its political engagements. China is is and will be a formidable player in the global order. When the global order is in the midst of change, that's precisely when you hope that America is thinking deeply and critically about how to mold and shape that relationship in a way that will enhance stability, that will set parameters, because there's lots of China behavior on the part of China that we need to set clear parameters for. But even more importantly, start to bring China in, not just to a bilateral relationship to the United States, but bring China into a broader multilateral order in which a US has an important voice in. And what I've seen, and I can tell you, I've lived in Africa, I've lived in South Asia during my time in the World Bank. China is playing a critical role in the multilateral world through its Belt and Road Initiative, through its political engagement. And it's taking a lot of the space that America once I think, dominated. So I think America is got to be playing a more strategic role. I don't see a strong strategy in just building a competitive landscape. I see a way of trying to bring allies together to try to bring China into a multilateral fold, which will put some guardrails over its behavior. And hopefully, I don't think we'll transform China. We have no business transforming China, but we'll sort of set the parameters of that behavior so China becomes a more cooperative player on global issues. And we need China to be a cooperative player on global issues, or we won't solve them.
Bernard goes back to a little bit a different type of question. Are the core principles of diplomacy different today as they were decades ago? It's
a great question. I mean, look, I would say that the practice of being diplomatic has not changed. And I often talk about that with our students, right? We study diplomacy as a kind of subject matter of engagement across nations, but it just as important is teaching us to be diplomatic, teaching us how to understand difference in a cooperative and understanding way, so that we are kind of making the most of difference. We are finding cooperative solutions around difference. And we're doing that through a style of behavior that is understanding of the other side, that tries to empathize with the other side. If not, that doesn't necessarily mean always do what the other side wants. So I think those core principles of what it means to be diplomatic have not changed at all. But the tools of diplomacy have changed radically. I mean, let's be clear. You know, the technology of communication has changed radically. So state-to-state communication is completely different than it was a generation ago. The ability to even do things like have secret communication, have diplomatic dialogue that is protected, so that states can talk frankly to each other in an environment where they don't have to worry that that information is going to be leaked, or that tough analysis is going to find its way on a Twitter feed. That's changed the nature of how we analyze, how we engage, how we talk, both in the public arena as well as the private diplomatic arena. Plus, the actors of diplomacy have changed. So I talked a little bit before about business and international affairs. Firms are major players in the diplomatic space in a way that they weren't before. Google, Amazon, Facebook have essentially the equivalent of a foreign service, many of them staffed by our graduates, who are thinking about what the company's engagement and responsibilities of the world are. There's a war room in Facebook led by one of our graduates that look at international hotspots and crises around the world, and how does Facebook respond? Because Facebook is a player in protests in China. Facebook is a player in protests and movements around the world. Facebook is a player in political misinformation, as we all know. So these companies are playing a key role. And so our diplomats have a completely different set of tools that they have to engage with. So being diplomatic hasn't changed, but exercising diplomacy has changed radically.
I think Bill actually had a question to what we just touched upon, if there's something additional. So Bill writes, how can the academic and business communities unite too? And I think some of it's happening naturally is happening. Anything additional that we can share with Bill? Again,
well, it's a great question. And I think, you know, I have to say, I started my life, you mentioned, I started my life as a pure academic. I taught in political science departments at Columbia and Harvard. And I left academia because I was frustrated. I worked on Russia and Eastern Europe, Sandhya, a place you know a lot about. And I was doing it at the time when the Berlin Wall fell and when the Soviet Union collapsed, and the whole global order was changing. And as an academic, I felt tremendous frustration that I was observing the world changing and not being a part of that. And that led me ultimately to go work in the World Bank and be engaged in development. After 20 years in development and thinking about returning to academia, I'm actually quite concerned, as the questioner sort of suggested, that academia still has not made the transition it needs to make so that there is a true engagement with the world of practice. And the world of practice means the world of diplomatic practice. So diplomats like Kit Ashby and others and what they've learned and bringing that into the academic space. But business has so much to offer. I mean, I used to work in some of the most difficult conflict countries around the world with the World Bank. And when I flew into a country after conflict, on the plane, of course, were lots of development workers, but on the plane were also people from consumer products companies who were looking for new markets, people who were doing finance and financial development and what that means. And the experience that they gained, the work that they're doing is a critical component, and we need to bring academia together with that world of practice. And I think that it's really not that many schools that are doing that. International affairs schools, and there's some great ones in Texas, are doing that. And I think that's why these schools, I think, are at the cutting edge, because they're challenging academia to go outside of a very kind of restricted environment of the way in which they work. And they're also challenging the world of practice to think more deeply, analytically, about the world that they are living in on a day-to-day, and they also often don't have the time to engage with. So I think it's bringing those two things together, and that's why I love public policy schools and international affairs schools, because they are at the cutting edge of doing that.
Absolutely. Arlene writes, are you optimistic that the change of leadership in the US, that we can reverse the negative aspects of foreign engagement that has been, quote unquote, damaged?
I do think there has been a significant, this isn't a kind of roll the clock back issue. I do think, if you think about, I engage all the time with representatives of other countries at the diplomatic level, at the government level, at the business level. And the number of times you hear the phrase, I never would have thought in America you could have done fill in the blank. Just, you fill in the blank. So many different. And what that means is that the range of the possible in America has shifted. And it's not about one president or one government or one administration. What people recognize is that there is a deeper wellspring of concern and a reaction to America's role in the world that is supported by a significant part of the public, and this is not a marginal part of the public; it's a significant part of the public. And I think that our world players, global players, recognize that what is now possible in America, the scope, the spectrum of policy has changed. And that change is not going to snap back. That change is still there because 35–40% of the American public supports that view. And probably more, I'm not even talking about the public approval ratings of the president, more people, if you start to ask them, is China an enemy of ours? Should we be investing in multilateral institutions? Or are these kind of wastes of our money? Should America be spending so much money around the world instead of supporting other countries? Should America be engaging in democracy promotion? Ask any of those questions and you will see large portions of America expressing significant doubt. So this is not about one administration, about one president. And I think the most sophisticated global players understand that the shape of American support for America's role in the world has changed. And I'm actually afraid, to be perfectly frank, that if we go back in a new administration and say, we've got a change of government, let's just go back to where we were. Let's get the same people and just ignore the fact that we had these deep questioning that went on. I'm afraid that we will not make progress going forward. And I'm deeply concerned about that. I'll tell one last anecdote. At the School of Foreign Service, we screened a fabulous a documentary of President Obama's last year in office. And it was about his foreign policy team, Susan Rice and Ben Rhodes and other people in the foreign policy team. And it was a wonderful documentary about the last year of their administration, what they tried to achieve, what they tried to do. And of course, it shows President Obama, who is, as we all know, a cerebral, engaged president on issues of foreign affairs. He had a very, very smart and sharp team around him of engaged players. And you watch them act in the film, and you then watch them respond to the Trump administration and the shock. And all of them were deeply shocked, and all of them didn't see this coming. And so we screened this film and we watched it and we looked back at that era. And we had a panel afterwards of those key players who were in the film. And I said, okay, so none of you saw this coming. What have you learned since then? What did you miss? What did you not understand about the way you were conducting foreign policy that led us to this moment? And frankly, there was silence. And there was actually an extreme reaction to the question. So I'm concerned that if we don't ask seriously, why have we lost American support for key aspects of American global engagement and multilateralism, And if we just say, let's turn the clock back to where we were 4 years ago, we are going to miss critical parts of what we need to rebuild America's role in the world and rebuild confidence among those players that this is not just some fleeting phenomenon that could return again.
Wonderful, thank you. The questions still keep coming in, and I see some of the questions we answer as we go, which is really great. Again, that we are aligning with our audience and as we are presenting, so wonderful. A student writes us, we spoke about this a little bit as well. What helps a prospective student stand out as an applicant to your school?
Well, there is no secret sauce, I'm afraid.
No?
If it was, I'd be keeping it close to my chest. But it is, you know, there is one thing, and it's your expression of your passion for global service. I mean, I think that's what distinguishes. When we look at an application, what we want is to pop out at us this incredible passion for engaging the world, and I think service to the world. I would say that one of the most interesting things that we're seeing now in the current student body on our campus, and that's coming to our campus, is maybe 5 or 7 years ago, what you could say even at a place like the School of Foreign Service was there was a careerist tilt to the students, that they were more and more thinking about, well, what's going to be a successful career for me? How do I engage in international business, because that's a secure career path? Perhaps a bit less concern about the social impact of their work and more concerned about their own personal circumstances. Now what you sort of see is every student who comes to us, they want to do well, don't get me wrong, every student wants to do well, and they want to find a career path that's going to support them and engage them. But they want to have impact, and they want to serve. And that doesn't necessarily mean going in the public sector. It could be the private sector, could be the public sector, could be multilateral, could be domestic. But I think every student needs to think about, how do I want to serve? And how do I demonstrate my commitment to service? Maybe that's creating companies that, you know, change the way the world works. But I think they have to think through what they are going to do in terms of service. And if you can express that to us, if you can get that, if you through interviews, through your essays, through your service as students in your community, in your school, that's what we're looking for, as well as great grades and great test scores.
It certainly sounds kind of full circle, right? That your school was established with a mission to serve, and that's still really strong keyword that keeps coming back to us. Ellie asked us, what is your ideal vision of the USA's role in the global community?
My ideal vision is an America that is able to work together with a large number of countries to try to think through common solutions to global problems. That's a different view. It's not America trying to reshape the world in its image. It's not America trying to move countries to systems, political or economic systems that we find more compatible or more beneficial to us. It's not trying to sort of foment change domestically, but it's trying to understand and recognize that there are players in the world with different interests. But whatever our different approaches might be to the world, we're facing a set of common problems increasingly, problems that cross-cut our own nations, and that only cooperative solutions make sense. Those cooperative solutions are damn difficult to create. They require a lot of compromise. They require a lot of cajoling. They require a lot of acceptance of difference. They are often require an enormous amount of patience. But that is the way we are going to sort of make gradual and evolutionary change. And when we're talking about the problems that we're facing now, climate change, a global pandemic, a new form of global communication, which goes well beyond states and individuals, cyber risks and cyber threats, the way in which artificial intelligence is going to change the security landscape. These are not things that we can solve on our own. They're not things that we can solve bilaterally. They're only things that can bring together multilateral solutions. So I think we need America that has the humility to understand that we cannot do any viable solutions without bringing together large coalitions of players with very different interests, very different approaches to the world. And I think that's where that's the ideal role that America needs to play. It's different than it has in the past. We're not the hegemon anymore. We're not the dominant global player. We are one among many, but we still have such an important influence. And incidentally, it's the educational system that has been drawing 1 million students a year to our country that actually has sort of solidified America's influence around the world. And that's why I'm so deeply disappointed that we are risking that in these last few months and years.
I think we'll probably go ahead and finish up on this kind of idealistic view and kind of nice summary of what we've spoken, and from diplomacy to day-to-day operations and day-to-day lives of students. Any last thoughts, Dean, comments that you would like to leave our participants with?
Well, first of all, I'm very pleased to see that we're getting a lot more applications from Texas. That's great, because I mean, it is absolutely critical that we see a deeper engagement across the United States. So first of all, for all of those who are listening and your networks and your friends and others, tell them about what we're doing at the School of Foreign Service. Tell them about our mission, because we really want and need students from Texas, one of the largest states in the United States in terms of population and certainly size. We need a deep engagement. And I'm thrilled, that the World Affairs Council, is running these discussions and inviting me, and I'm humbled to be a part of it. I think it's critical to have these discussions to get different perspectives into this mix. And I really do wish you well in this very exciting set of programs I know that you're building in this time, and using, the one decent thing about Zoom is that it manages to get people to engage with a lot lower cost and a lot of ease. So I hope you're bringing some fabulous speakers and to your members and students to bring even more perspective from Texas around the world. So thank you, and thanks everyone for being part of this.
Thank you, Dean. Thank you, our participants, our viewers, our loyal friends of the council. We look forward to seeing you again tomorrow, as I said, as we have a conversation on US-China relations, another very timely discussion. Dean, thank you again. Wish you all the best, and do hope that one of those days our paths cross. And anytime you have any message and you find your secret sauce, you let us know. We'll make sure that we advertise the recipe.
Well, thank you. Stay well, everyone. I wish you all the best. Stay healthy. Stay well.
Will do. Thanks, and good night. That concludes our program for this evening. Bye-bye.